This time, Christianity had left Jerusalem and headed into the Roman Greco world, where it was pretty popular to have this whole supernatural conception story.
You know what else was popular in Jewish culture? Supernatural birth stories. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90. We also have supernatural birth stories regarding Jacob and Esau, Joseph, Samson, Samuel, John the Baptist. No, these aren't virgin births, but they are miraculous births, and this shows that this is a very popular theme in Judaism, not paganism.
Indeed, in Judaism and in the Old Testament, you do have cases of supernatural births in which the woman is barren, unable to give birth, and God intervenes so that miraculously now the woman is able to give birth, such as with Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Samson. You do have those cases, but what's missing is that the child is not divine himself as a result of being directly descended from a god and a mortal woman, such as you find in Hellenistic culture. Robert M. Price describes this well when he says that Judaism is used as a buffer. One seizes upon any possible Jewish parallel with this or that feature of New Testament thought or myth that Bultmann or Reitzenstein had tagged a Hellenistic borrowing. Such a Jewish precedent is judged ipso facto preferable to any Hellenistic one. In all of this, the reasoning seems to be that even a vague Jewish parallel is automatically to be preferred over even a close Hellenistic parallel as the source of a New Testament doctrine or mytheme. And the reason for this bias can only be the traditional theological desire to have the New Testament grow out of the Old as by a process of progressive revelation. Let us widen the scope of Jewish origin to include rabbinism and the pseudepigrapha if we must, but God forbid we should have to admit that Christianity had non-Jewish roots as well as Jewish. And let's be real, Christianity did arise from a thoroughly Greco-Roman world in which Jews themselves by Jesus' time had been thoroughly Hellenized. As M. David Litwa so eloquently puts it, Christianity was born from a Jewish mother who was already Hellenized. In the time of Jesus himself, Palestinian Jews had thoroughly adopted and adapted Greek ideas, including theological ones, to such an extent that in many cases what appears to be a distinctly Jewish notion is in fact a Greco-Jewish cultural hybrid. We see this, of course, in Philo of Alexandria and in the Gospel of John, where they partake of the Greek logos. We see this in Philo of Alexandria and in the Essenes, where they speak of immortality or the afterlife being the result of spiritual rebirth in a disembodied soul. This is not to say that there were no traditional or Orthodox Jews of the time who resisted the temptation to Hellenize. The Maccabees, of course, are a perfect example of this, but as even Second Maccabees complains, it laments an increase in Hellenization and the adoption of foreign ways. Why were Jews of the time upset about this kind of thing? Because they knew that lots of other Jews were doing just that. They were becoming Hellenized. They were absolutely adopting foreign, pagan, Hellenistic ideas and myths and legends.
The pagan examples that she puts up on the screen here are not anything remotely like the virgin birth story that we find in the Gospels. Romulus and his twin brother Remus were conceived by a virgin priestess after the god Mars raped her and impregnated her. Hercules' mother was said to have caught Zeus's eye, and he pretended to be her fiancée and impregnated her. Asclepius was the son of Apollo and a mortal woman named Coronis. When Coronis had sex with a mortal man named Ischys, Apollo got extremely jealous and killed him. Coronis was then killed by Artemis for not being faithful to Apollo. Coronis was laid out on a funeral pyre and about to have their body burned, but Apollo rescued the child by cutting him from Coronis' womb. In other words, he was the first C-section.
But see, there are differences between the narratives. Never mind the overriding theme of a divine child being born from a high god and a mortal woman. You can ignore that because there are differences. If it's not identical, then there's nothing similar to see here.
None of these are very convincing parallels. Raymond Brown is a well-known New Testament scholar, and he's famous for casting doubt on the historical accuracy of the gospel birth narratives. But even he thinks that these parallelomania theories are hogwash.
There you have it. Catholic scholar Raymond Brown thinks these parallels are hogwash.
In his book, The Birth of the Messiah, Brown writes, "How attractive or acceptable would these pagan legends have been to Greek-speaking Jewish Christians? Would they have wanted to model the conception of Jesus after them? Many of the legends involved gross or amoral sexual conduct on the part of the deity who is thought to have begotten the child. In Wisdom 14:24 through 26 and Romans 1:24 show how Greek-speaking Jews and Jewish Christians would react to such conduct."
Yep, we get it, Raymond Brown. Everybody loves Raymond. There are differences between the stories. No shizen. Here's what you're not going to get from Raymond Brown, I suppose, or from Eric Manning of Testify. There are some stories in the Greco-Roman world that are much closer to the mark, like well within the ballpark, as Justin Martyr attests. And if we even affirm that he, Jesus, was born of a virgin, accept this in common with what you accept of Perseus. Perseus, of course, was the result of the virgin Danae having been enveloped by a golden shower by Zeus. Now, of course, there are some sexual undertones in this story, but it is a clear parallel. It is a golden shower, sort of like the pneuma of God, enveloping or coming near to a mortal woman and impregnating her with the godling. Other stories are even closer to the mark. Aeschylus in the 5th century BC tells us that the mortal maiden Io conceived Epiphus by the mere breath or pneuma of Zeus. He tells us that Io was unmated, unraped, stainless, etc. She was clearly a virgin, had never been touched by a man, and without any kind of sexual involvement from the high god Zeus, she birthed the divine Epiphus. That's a virgin birth. That's something very, very similar to what we find in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Plutarch, in the late 1st century, roughly about the same time as the composition of the Gospels, says that beings born of God do not come to be through seed, surely, but by another power of God, who engendered in matter the productive principle. And concerning the birth of Plato by the god Apollo and a mortal woman, Perictione, Plutarch says that with a woman it is not impossible for the spirit or pneuma of a god to draw near and engender certain principles of generation. This is right in line with what Luke talks about with the spirit or pneuma of God impregnating Mary with Christ. So whether Plato or Jesus Christ, it is the mere pneuma of the high God, not sexual contact or involvement, that gives way to the birth of the divine child. Now, to be fair, Eric Manning probably doesn't know about these texts, so he can be forgiven for simply being unaware. Or is he? Such as when he debated me on the Myth Vision podcast, and this was all pointed out to him right here. Allow me to be clear about my point here. Eric Manning seems like a nice enough guy. I'm sure he's a good dude. I don't hate his guts. When we had our little discussion or debate, I was hard on him. I was. I might have a little bit of regret about that. But this is precisely the kind of thing that I'm talking about with these religious apologists. You show them things, and it goes in one ear and out the other. This is the kind of cognitive dissonance reduction and confirmation bias that I see with these Christian apologists time and time and time again. They refuse to learn anything new when challenged on these points. They just dismiss it or ignore it and continue repeating the same old tired arguments that they've already seen debunked right in front of their face. Guys, if you really are objective truth seekers, if that's what you're doing, then this kind of behavior is simply inexplicable. If what you're actually trying to do is defend your own cherished faith by hook or by crook, then you're exhibiting exactly the kind of behavior that we would expect to see. And that's why we're calling you on it. Look, if you want to believe in Christianity, if you want to hold to faith, I have no problem with that whatsoever. It's none of my business what anyone else believes. I'm not here to wipe Christianity off the face of the earth or to dissuade anyone of their beliefs. Let 100 flowers bloom. This is a nation built on freedom of religion, and I believe in that. Everyone should have the right to believe or practice as they see fit, as long as they aren't harming anyone. I believe in freedom of religion. I believe in your right to be a Christian and to hold to those faith commitments. Just don't bullshit us.